parking lot in that neighborhood. But also a few times with the proponents I met, maybe 3 in total, and also made very clear to staff where I stood as the ward councillor and in representing the residents in an already, pretty over-intensified asphalt surface lot neighborhood in the city, including a summer project, I think it was 2 years ago now, for one of my summer staffers out of the Ward 2 office, where I shared with our staff parking counts at the current massive lot there on Ferguson and Barton that is, in my opinion, still, and as I noted when we dealt with this, albeit too late, underutilized as it stands now. So how is it that a relatively minor application ended up being overdue when it finally came to committee? Even if it wasn't tabled on April 14th, it was still overdue. Through you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Anita, would you like to answer that, please?
Through the chair to the councillor, I do know that there were some ongoing discussions with staff leading up to the report being prepared. Staff recommendation that was brought forward in May was in support of the application and was denied by Planning Committee, which is the reason for the appeal by the applicant.
Okay,
sorry, to be clear through you, Chair, I thought the reason for the appeal was a non-decision when I read the report.
Just to clarify,
Just to
Anita?
clarify?
Yes, sorry, through the chair to the councillor, you're correct. They did appeal for non-decision after the decision of Planning Committee to deny the application. After
the decision by Planning Committee and before our council ratification, if I'm correct there, Madam Chair, is that right?
That is correct.
And so they're not appealing the decision by all but one of us on council and this committee, I believe. They're actually appealing a non-decision. Can you take us through you, Chair, how outcomes of previous non-decisions through the OMB process for this city, and what's the likelihood of our being successful, considering we were late to the table to bring it to this table, even if it came April 14th, versus near unanimous decision by council not to go forward with the staff recommendation? Through you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe this one's for legal.
Mike?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The significance of whether there's a decision or not stems right from the Planning Act. The Planning Act has a provision which stipulates that where council makes a decision, the OMB must have regard to it. That adds a certain weight to the importance of a council decision when attending before the intermunicipal board. Where an appeal is filed for non-decision, the board is not bound by that statutory provision. That statutory provision does not apply, and therefore the board is, from a legal point of view, is effectively conducting a hearing from the perspective that it can disregard any position or pronouncement of City Council. And so where there is a decision, the board is required by statute to have regard to that decision. When there's an appeal for a non-decision, the board is conducting a hearing as if there is no context or background.
Councillor?
Really unfortunate. Kind of stinks, and by stinks I mean it smells bad. So through you to Jason, and I'm trying to be respectful here. Maybe our general manager can share his insights on how this occurred. Given again, I mean, 2 years or plus in the works, and obvious pushback from both the neighbors. There was petitions and previous work that my office did. I mean, I generally don't send staff out to take pictures and share with our staff, evidence of no need for such an expansion of surface parking in probably the one downtown neighborhood in all of this nation that has more of it already than anyone else. So maybe through you, and respectfully, Jay, I think you can see I was a little bit put off when I read this report. All things considered, a non-decision is a very different thing from a near unanimous decision of council that normally the OMB would consider but now will not. Maybe your thoughts on that through you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Jason, please.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, and I fully understand where the councillor is coming from, and certainly it's always staff's intention and goal to get recommendations in front of council in time to make decisions prior to the statutory deadlines in the Planning Act. They are very tight timelines, and quite often where staff finds itself caught is trying to meet those deadlines. At the same time, we're trying to make sure that we're giving time to applicants to negotiate, to have conversations with them, to try to find ways to not talking specifically about this application, but trying to find ways to facilitate the application and come up with a with an approach that staff can bring forward and support as part of being generally open for business and trying to facilitate development in the city. So that becomes the issue, is trying to have the time to actually be able to have those conversations. At the same time, we're trying to meet Planning Act deadlines, within that 180-day period, we have to work in timelines for staff to write reports, for management to review those reports. So it's tight. I think you'll see at the next planning committee, we bring forward some of our recommendations on Planning Act reform on Bill 73. This is one of the very issues that we're looking to suggest to the province that they address, to either to look at those timelines, to provide options where when discussions are happening with applicants, we can hit the pause button, so to speak, so we can create time for those discussions to happen without running into those statutory timelines.
In this case, Jason, over 2 years back and forth with staff, would you not agree that that's more than enough time to kind of hash this one out through you?
Jason?
I think, with this one, when we actually received the application, we were looking at, I think it was November of 2014 is when we had the complete application in. October? Received in October, deemed complete in November. So that's when we're actually dealing with a real application on our plates, and being able to sort to look at some of the specifics. So again, I do understand where the councillor is coming from, and that we do as staff try to meet those statutory timelines as much as possible, because we do understand the significance of a council decision relative to a non-decision.
So at that time, through you, Chair, we had an election. We've seen this before where applications come in during an election where quite obviously we're standing down with committee meetings. Our efforts as councillors are to get re-elected, and the whole city is in election mode. Did that have any bearing on this particular issue? Through you, Chair?
Jason?
Through the chair, I'm not sure it did, because at that point in the time in the process where we're dealing with it at a staff level, when we first received the application, where that's been an issue is when the application was received sometime before the council meeting, and that 180-day deadline hits during an election period when there's no committee meetings or council meetings. So it's really whether the point of council decision falls during election period as opposed to the post-election period.
Councillor?
I'm almost worried, Madam Chair, that I maybe was too assertive and showed too many cards with my friends in the Beasley Neighborhood Association. And, it just appears to me that the timing of the submittal, and given the circumstances, that's in question. So I'm hopeful that through you, Chair, or Steve, or Jay, or whomever, when you're appealing to the province, you also look at those election periods every 4 years, and maybe the 180 days turns to 360 or something like that. But maybe we can talk about that offline, or maybe you can bring it up at the next committee meeting. As you say, you're going to be bringing that forward for a committee to determine. So back to legal through you, Chair. I didn't quite understand. I'm hearing what you're saying. Council obviously ratified -1 vote to work with the current lot to not go with the staff recommendation of expanding surface asphalt in an already overly intensified surface asphalt neighborhood. I was very happy at that conclusion. It's never fun going against staff. It's rare for me, but in this case, I felt 100% I was doing the right thing, and certainly since and during supporters in the Beasley neighborhood, including those that were on the petition, were grateful for that. My guess is they're not now. I need to know legally if council's decision now has no bearing. Are we in worse shape, no matter who we hire as outside legal, knowing that we can't hire any of you very effective representatives who work for the corporation? Are our chances diminished now because this is now a non-decision issue as opposed to a council near unanimous vote against a staff recommendation to expand surface asphalt parking lot in an already over-intensified neighborhood with surface asphalt parking?
Mike, please.
To you, Madam Chair, is the motion that's been proposed Councillor Farr, is for authorization in the event, and assuming Council endorses the committee recommendation, authorization to retain outside planning consultants, because the Council position would be different from at odds with city staff. So it would be necessary to go outside to retain a planning consultant to support the Council position at the board, and for that to be funded from the Tax Stabilization Fund. So that's a fairly standard recommendation that we seek on those occasions when the Council takes a position that's different from planning staff. And with respect to the position at the board, from a legal point of view, and I mean that from in terms of the principle of law, as opposed to necessarily the dynamic or the momentum or the actual merits that could be established on the ground. Certainly, from a legal point of view, it's always preferable to have a council decision that one can draw upon as a tool to persuade the board that it ought to defer, all things being equal, it ought to defer to the municipal position. And when there is no such decision at law, that is an argument that we typically are not in a position to make. I would point out, and I stand to be corrected, but my recollection is that under Bill, whatever the bill is, I think it's Bill 73, that's before the legislature right now that proposes Planning Act reform. My recollection is one of the recommendations in there is to modify the provision so that even if a decision is made or direction is provided by a municipality outside the time period, that should also carry some weight in front of the board. So at least there's some recognition by the province that there needs to be a review of that provision.
Councillor, did that answer your question?
And just very briefly, Madam Chair, I'm hearing you say we need to move a motion here, and I'm happy to move a motion to hire outside legal to support council's position. But what's the point if council's position is not going to be considered because of the lapse in time? And so, briefly, through you, Chair.
Yeah, so just to clarify, Councillor, it's not to hire outside legal, it's to hire an outside planning consultant. Mike, do you want to expand on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, and that's correct. It's outside planning, not legal, outside planning. Well, we still have a council position. We have council direction that constitutes our instructions as to the position to represent at the board. And so it's still necessary to call evidence and present the case at the board. We take our instructions from council. Council instructs us to oppose this application and to attend at the hearing and present that case. Then we still need that direction, authorization to retain an outside planner to provide evidence to support the council position.
So we're being requested, it's being recommended today that we do this. We get an outside planning consultant. Thank you, Chair, for that correction. But we're also hearing moments ago that the board is now not bound by this council decision. Through you, Chair. I'm just really trying to understand this. Mike?
Mike?
Yes, it's just the board, the statute says that where the decision is made out of time, where there is no decision made within time, the board is not required to have regard to the council decision. There is no decision. So it's a council position. And if council instructs, adopts a position to oppose an application and instructs us, therefore, to attend at the hearing, we are obligated at that point to attend before the board and present the best case possible. And part of the case that's presented to the board is to try to persuade the board that notwithstanding that there was no decision, purely on the planning merits, that the council position, not decision, but position, is worthy of being adopted by the board. So we still, at that point, we are, as advocates, in a position of trying to persuade the board to look at the merits, irrespective of the fact that there's no decision, to look at the planning merits itself.
And if I can just add to that, just to clarify, our planning staff would not be attending the OMB because we would be hiring an outside planner. Councillor?
I understand that. So they would still, the outside planner, argue on behalf of a near unanimous council decision to go against a staff recommendation, and that argument would be heard and taken under consideration, despite what you said about the OMB not being bound by any council decision.
Mike?
They're more or less looking at it as a council position and not a decision. Is that it, through your chair?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct. Because there's no decision does not mean that the hearing does not go on. It just means that the board makes its decision from solely based on the merits, whereas if there is a decision, that is a legal factor that the board then must take into consideration.
Okay, thank you. One final question through you, Madam Chair, to Jason or whomever on staff. In the past, I have been apprised by whomever in planning of these deadlines, these timelines, that we needed to get whatever documents and recommendations to this committee before the 180 days expired. In this case, to my recollection, and I could be wrong, I don't recall ever, and I mean, I, again, corresponded on this more than probably anything in the last 4 and a bit, having anybody from planning and economic development reach out to me and say, you know what, FAR, we better get this in February just to buy us some time, understanding over the last 2 years you've corresponded with us about your position representing the Neighborhood Association of Expanded Surface Parking. And that never, I don't, to my recollection, recall ever having that correspondence, but in the past on other files, it has. So what maybe broke down here, or am I off and missed an email or a phone call through you, Chair?
Okay, Jason, do you want to take that, please?
Yes, through Madam Chair, and I can follow up with staff in terms of the timing on that. That is certainly what we try to do in each case when we know that a deadline is looming, and where there may be an issue with the application, to make sure that the councillors are aware that when that 180-day timeline is coming. In terms of the correspondence between staff and the councillor, I'd have to sort of look into that after the meeting, if I may, to see what communication did happen, or if there was a communication breakdown in terms of letting the councillor know that that date was approaching.
Okay, thank you. Councillor?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, before we, just to let everybody know, we have Councillors Collins, Green, and Pearson next. But before we do that, could I just remind everyone in the audience to please put your cell phones on silent so it does not interrupt the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And I think Councillor Farr has raised a number of good issues and pertinent issues this morning as it relates to the timing of reports and how they flow through to committee. I think what's been consistent over the years for anyone who served on council for any length of time, going back to the days of Mayor Wade, when we actually had the Open for excuse me, Opportunity Task Force. It wasn't the Open for Business, it was originally Open for Opportunity Task Force. It was created around 2002, 2003 to get at the whole issue of cutting red tape and facilitating applications and all the good things that we try to do to make it the environment more business friendly here in Hamilton. And so this isn't a new issue for us, but I'm very concerned certainly about the technicalities related to a non-decision. No councillor in no neighborhood wants to be stuck at the OMB only to find that the other side, understanding that it should be based solely on its merit. We don't want to find ourselves staring at the adjudicator only to find that the other side is mentioning the fact that it took us so many days in addition to the 180, and that's why their application should be approved. So I just think the optics in general, number one, from a red tape perspective, it certainly doesn't look good, and number two, from a neighborhood perspective, as Councillor Farr has noted, he's been working hand in hand with the neighborhood on this one, it sounds like, for quite some time. And so to have the report in front of us beyond the 180 days, and again, it was a very minor application. I mean, we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of units as part of a subdivision or a rezoning application. I mean, this is a version of a couple of buildings into parking lots, and so from a technical perspective, it's a quite minor one. So I wonder whether, I can't recall whether it was referenced in the report that we were past the 180 days. Can I ask?
Yes, thank you. Anita? Steve? Or Jason?
Fair to the councillor. I don't believe the report indicated how many days had passed, but in the chronology, we would identify when applications were received.
Councillor?
My next question, and thanks for that, is related to just how we internally process applications. Again, as you know, as the committee chair and anyone who's chaired standing committees, there's weeks ahead of time these reports are prepared just to get it to the table. It's not the preparation of it, it's just to procedurally work it through the clerk's department, get it to committee. How many days do we lose, 180, just getting the report to committee?
That's a very good question. Anita?
Through the chair to the councillor, generally the report is due to the supervisor. So the first step in the report process is it's delivered to the, that's roughly 60 days. And then within that cycle, there's review by myself, the manager, the director, the GM, and then to clerks, and then the process that clerks would go through. So it's roughly, we say it's usually roughly about, actually I'm looking, it's on average probably about 64 days.
Create some very tight timelines when you start doing the math in reverse in terms of just getting it to committee. It doesn't really give a lot of time or as much time as maybe these applications deserve in light of the fact that there's a process, a bureaucratic process to get the committee, the agenda in front of us. And that's no one's fault. I certainly understand that's part of the process. But I think it highlights the fact that this has been from the open for opportunity to the open for business to the Neville report to the budget enhancements we passed. We've tried to do everything we can to facilitate the seamless flow of applications to committee. Certainly this one, it kind of sticks out for the reasons that Councillor Farr so eloquently, I think, highlighted. And I think maybe where we should be going with this, and I would be very interested to understand whether we can get some kind of a chart presented at every committee that maybe tells committee members what applications are in the works, how many days are left in terms of the statutory requirements to get us to the 180 days, and if there's something that staff needs above and beyond what is traditionally provided to them in terms of resources, then committee can be there to say, you know what, Jason, whoever, we really want this one to, we want them all to reach the 180 days, but if there are matters or issues that we can certainly be of some assistance. If we don't have the information, there's no way we can offer our help. And I believe that we've been kept out of the loop. I mean, I have no idea what applications are in right now in my area. Sometimes we get the pre-circulation, we can go downstairs, but in terms of where they are in the process, we'd all be guessing right now in terms of what applications are in for our respective wards and where they are in that process. So I would suggest, and I don't know if you want me to do it at the end of the meeting, I can certainly do it under motion. That is that staff report back with a, not really a key performance indicator, but more of an outstanding business list related to development applications that have been officially submitted and are part of the 180-day requirement or timelines. Maybe I'll put some words together between now and the end of the meeting, but I really believe, just based on this one and some of the others in the past, and the fact that we've thrown a lot of resources at planning, that it might help all parties involved to...
And thank you, Councillor, for that, because I do think a motion would be appropriate. And if you want to work on the wording, then I'll come back to you at the end of the meeting, but thank you for that. Councillor Green, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, right in line with what Councillor Collins was saying, gosh, we go through this process and we try to have this committee for local planning decisions, give, variances that are large and small or recommendations that are large and small, and I would agree this one seemed pretty small. I know I attended the community meetings myself and certainly heard from the neighborhoods, and so I can see how when a process runs the clock out, it's kind of embarrassing. And it's no disrespect to staff. Certainly I know they're working under tight guidelines. I'm hopeful that through Councillor Collins' motion, I have it here, I call it the shot clock list, to know how much time is left in the clock for these projects, because you're right, I would hate to look through an agenda here and find out that we're it's already a done deal, or the timelines are such that we're kind of just going through this process of futility. So I certainly fully support Councillor Collins, and I'm also very interested to see wherein staff at a systems level process, we could look at those 64 days to tighten that up, to give our planners more time to be able to do the diligence they need to do in order to make sound reports. So I think that if we're spending a third of our time just on the red tape, I think that would be accurate to call that the red tape, between getting it from staff to getting it to clerks in front of us. Hopefully there's somewhere in there, and maybe clerks might know where we can speed that up, or maybe some of staff from SMT. Madam Chair, if I can just ask that question, who would be able to look at that systems level 64-day turnaround to be able to give us maybe a week or 10 days more on the shot clock?
Jason?
So through the chair, I mean, that is part of what we can look at in terms of our process improvements, but that 64 days includes the time for manager, director, myself to review the application, and to get those to clerks in terms of having them then prepared and distributed to council. So there's a lot that happens in that 60-day period. I mean, we always do look at it, can it be shortened, but we are dealing with some hard timelines in there. The other thing with this application is because it included a zoning bylaw amendment, there we actually only have 120 days. So that actually becomes the operable deadline that we're working on. And need to mention the fact that we've got 60 days on the back end. We typically will have at least 30 days on the front end as well, because from the date we get an application to the date we deem it complete, that's the time period during which we are getting some of the supporting studies in from the applicant. So that usually takes at least in the neighborhood of 30 days, but the clock actually then starts ticking retroactively from when the application first landed in the door. So we're typically losing 30 days off the front end, 60 days off the back end. When you've got 120 days to comment on a zoning bylaw amendment, those timelines start to become pressing. That's why I said that's a theme you'll see in our comments on Bill 73 on the Planning Act reform, that trying to deal with issues during those comment periods is extremely difficult. But the point is taken, and we can always look at how we can try to shave a day or two off approvals process and review process, and we have done that in the past. But at the end of the day, we're still dealing with a very tight timeline.
Okay, Councillor?
I can appreciate that, Madam Chair. Certainly, I know we have capable staff, very intelligent professional staff, and I know there's some really slick planners out there who are clearly using this system to get the most out of that timing piece, to have that in their back pocket. So I'm very interested in finding out what the outstanding business is. I know from personal experience, very short time here, that you never want to read about decisions in the paper. You want to make sure you're having clear communication from staff so you can get ahead of things. So perhaps somewhere in that 64 days when SMT is getting their plans and we get a better sense for where these reports are at, that it's also circulated to council so that we can have that information and be able to make decisions accordingly. Because, we put ourselves out there, we go through these processes, we are forward facing to the community. So when these things happen, invariably we will be getting the calls back. And I just like to have a little bit more time and get a little bit ahead of these things so that we're not stuck in the situation that we're faced today. I certainly feel for Councillor Farr in the position he's in. I supported him with that. It's abutting my neighborhood as well. And here we are with a non-decision, which is exactly the red tape that people are talking about. So those are my comments, and I support, I'm happy to second or support Councillor Collins' motion when it hits the floor so that we can not have to, potentially not have to deal with this again.
All right, thank you, Councillor. And as Chair of the Planning Committee, I'll certainly be working with staff to push the motion forward and bring it back to. And Councillor Pearson, I have you next.
No, my apologies, Madam Chair, because I did say to remove my name from the list because my questions were answered. But I certainly thank Councillor Farr for the thorough questioning and the information that's been brought forward, because that's what I was going to ask. But on the vein of the Bill 73, I also want to ask through to you, and I was going to ask it later today. Mr. Thorne is aware of it. Where are we in connection with completion of our comprehensive zoning bylaws for us commercial and residential? Because that's one of our major hang-ups for a lot of these applications that come before us. So can I ask through you, Madam Chair, because I know the commercial component was pretty well drafted at least 4 years ago. It got shelved. We've never seen anything come back. and it's past due now. So, to you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Steve, please.
Through you, Madam Chairman, to the Ward Councillor. As you understand, the major push right now has been on completion of the rural zoning, which we intend to bring forward to the Planning Committee meeting in July. Joanne Hickey-Evans, she has recruited additional staff within her zoning bylaw team to start working on the commercial zoning to pick up where we left off. So we've been revising those draft zoning regulations, and then the intent is to begin stakeholder consultation in the fall of this year, some targeted stakeholder consultation, and then following up with some general public input and consultation on those draft zoning regulations, looking at both the local commercial, the arterial commercial, and the district commercial regulations. And then running in conjunction with the commercial zoning, we're also doing the mixed use zoning. And the intent is to have the mixed use and the commercial zoning wrapped up in 2016. And then starting in 2016, we'll be launching the work on rewriting the residential zones. And that'll effectively complete most of the outstanding items in the new zoning bylaw. And then there'll be a series of minor amendments or some other chapters just to round out and complete the bylaw. But it is our plan to complete the commercial in 2016 and then residential no later than early 2017.
Thank you so very, very much. That's great news. I mean, I have citizens in Ward 10 that are sitting on pieces of property that are zoned neighborhood development, and they're in their late 70s now. They're sitting tight for this come forward. They've been sitting tight for 5 years, and I keep meeting with them saying it's coming, it's coming. So I appreciate that, and I think this will help free up the issues that we have in which to meet these deadlines that we have to meet. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. 2016 is certainly a date that we look forward to get that to come forward, and thank you for raising that. I appreciate it. So on item 5.2, I need a motion to receive the item, and then I will come to Councillor Farr for his motion. So motion to receive, Councillor Aidan Johnson, Councillor Matthew Green, all in favour? That is carried. Councillor Farr, please. You move the motion. Do you have a seconder?
Moved by myself, Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Green, that in keeping with the funding source for other appeals where council authorizes the retainer of outside consultants, the amount required to retain such experts to support the city's position before the OMB be funded through the Tax Stabilization Reserve 110046. And just a few comments and questions through you, Chair. Is that correct, through you to legal, the city's position, or do we say council's position?
Mike?
This case.
It can be council's position through you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so council's position, and I wouldn't mind putting in the vote count. I believe it was 15-1. So if Ida could check that, and before ratification, I can make the.
Ida, can you include that? Okay, thank you.
Council's position by ratification at X date, council meeting, and by the vote of 15-1 or whatever it was. And just again, and you know, I understand and appreciate the challenges. I don't completely understand what went wrong here on a relatively minor application. I think we can all agree this, as Councillor Collins had noted, this was not a major zoning application or a massive residential development or anything in that line. But in this case, we're not only late, Madam Chair, we didn't know as a committee we were late. I didn't know as the councillor working with the community on this particular issue, albeit minor, but for some time in the community, with not only the opponents, but also the neighborhood people. And that kind of reflects badly on us. I'm not going to belabor it because there's still elements of this that I do not understand, and I will talk about offline. But I mean, I was first in line to support the enhancement during the budget period for Jay and his staff. The need was there. It was quite clear. I'm a proud member of the Planning Committee. This is an unfortunate situation. I am reassured, I must say, Madam Chair, by hearing Mike's comments that you know, we still are able, while it's not the greatest scenario, to have this outside planner share our position. We can share the unanimity on that position and the petition and all of those aspects, notwithstanding that the OMB has no real obligation. They can still hear it. and I can share that, at least hopefully bringing some peace of mind to the Beasley community. I'm sure they'll have some questions too, and I'll be engaging with them, and then maybe we all sit down as a collective and try to get some answers on this. I think Councillor Collins' motion will also go a long way, and I'll support that. I like the shot clock reference by Councillor Green as well, because I've been there many times as a former b-baller in this city. But finally, I want to mention so all this reflecting badly, not being in the loop doesn't look good. Running out of time on a relatively minor application doesn't look good. But also, it doesn't look good for Hamilton Health Sciences. And, they do so many great things, undoubtedly a partner on so many levels with us. But right from the get-go, in working with them on this one, trying to find some compromise as opposed to expanding surface asphalt parking in the most intensified surface asphalt parking community in all of Canada. I think I can safely say it's just not healthy what they were after here. To want to rezone what is zoned to build homes in this neighborhood and to make parking, but then to not even share with us in their 2 attempts to get through to us as a planning committee that time was running out, that we could go to the OMB for a non-decision. We've heard other applicants make those claims before. Sometimes maybe it's because they want to intimidate, I don't know. But they didn't even bother to share that with me offline or twice when they addressed this issue with committee. So that doesn't look good on Hamilton Health Sciences as it relates to this particular issue, where we are in complete opposite ends and specific only to this issue, because I do agree most of what they do is significant and great and well respected throughout the country, quite obviously. But in this case, I don't think anybody looks good on this one. So anyway, that's my motion. Councillor Green seconds it, and I hope we get a real good planner and I get a chance to talk to them before they go to the OMB, along with my friends from the Beasley Neighbourhood Association.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Farr, and those are all very valid points, because you have worked very, very hard on this application and indeed all applications that come through. And I think staff will take that as direction as far as you being involved in the opportunity to meet with the planner. So that is the motion. All in favor? Carried. Any opposed? Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Pearson, you wanted to say something.
I was on the list. Thank you, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
you were.
And I
Go
want to
ahead.
thank Councillor Farr for stating the vote was 15-1. I was the dissenting voter. So I can confirm that that was the vote at committee and council. And I would like to please be recorded as opposed to direction. Thank you.
All right, fessing up. Well done. Thank you. All right, thank you. Good work on that. We're moving on to 6.1, which is the application for approval of a draft plan of condominium by Spalacci & Sons Limited for lands known as 280 to 344 Rymel Road East, and that is in Ward 8. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the draft plan of condominium, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Ontario Municipal Board, and the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of that board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. And I need to repeat this 3 times, so bear with me. Are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? Are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? Are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? All right. Seeing none. Councillor Pearson?
Madam Chair, can I move a motion that we waive the presentation by staff?
Absolutely. A seconder? Councillor Aidan Johnson actually did step up. All in favor on waiving the staff presentation? All right, thank you. Now, Agent, do we have any questions at all? I know the ward councillor is certainly in favor of this particular file, so may I have a motion to close the public meeting? Madam Clerk?
Sorry, what's the
Well, you
question?
waived the staff presentation. There's no one in the public to speak to it.
So just comment, Madam Chair, whether or not the agent has any comments. That's just, I don't know if it's on your roadmap. Thank you.
So Jared Marcus of the IBI Group is in attendance. If the committee has any questions. Do you have any questions? You have no questions. You have a comment? All right, so let's move it. Councillor Collins, thank you, which is what I intended to do, and seconded by Councillor Green. And that is all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item 6.2, which is the application for approval of amended draft plan of condominium for Urban Solutions on behalf of Sulphur Springs Development for lands known as One Legacy Lane, and that is in Ancaster. And I need to do this all over again, folks. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the draft plan of condominium, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Ontario Municipal Board, and the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of that board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. So, once again, 3 times, are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? Are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? Last time, are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? And I'm seeing no one, but may I have a motion? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Pearson.
To waive the presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? Carried. That is carried. And Sergio Mancia from Urban Solutions is in attendance. Now, do we, you want to do your PowerPoint presentation?
Madam Chairman,
although we've waived the presentation for staff.
We just have one comment on the presentation.
Go ahead, just make your comment, please.
Please, if through committee. On page 1 of 4, paragraph Roman numeral 5(1), says the purchasers and tenants are advised that the City of Hamilton will not. We ask if it can be consistent with the other portion of the paragraph and other sections of the report where it can have may not. And if I can bring it up on the screen, and I'll explain why. And I just briefed Mr. Robichaud on this. It may make some sense because we're dealing with a public cemetery within the subject lands. So again, I could present it to the committee and we can discuss it. Otherwise, that's the only thing. We just want to say thank you to staff, and we want to proceed with the registration of this application.
Okay, thank you. And does staff have any issue with with changing the wording slightly?
Through you, Madam Chairman, it is a unique situation that there is a public cemetery that will be serviced by a private condominium laneway, and because of that unique circumstances, staff have no objection to that change, and that will be ultimately resolved down the road between Public Works and the condominium corporation as to whether or not the city will be going in there to do any maintenance. So and it's only a warning clause as opposed to the city is not committing to do any snow removal or maintenance. It's just that we may partner with the condominium corporation if we have to get access to the cemetery during the winter months.
All right, so thank you very much. So seeing that staff have no issues with it, Madam Clerk, do we need an amendment, a motion of any kind to change the wording? Or can we just receive that as direction?
Probably better to have a motion.
Okay. Councillor Pearson, would you like to comment on that?
Madam Chair, I'll make that friendly amendment, that item page 1 of 4, Appendix D, B1 be changed to reflect that the City of Hamilton may not be providing as opposed to will not.
Okay, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Aidan Johnson. All in favor? Okay, that is carried. Now, so do you have a question of the presenter? If you have a question of staff, I'd like to receive the presenter, and then I'll come back to you.
It was actually on the
Okay, until he's gone. So thank you, Sergio. So
fine, thank you. Madam Chairman, just for the record, Sergio Mancia, Urban Solutions, and I'm here on behalf of Carriage Gate Homes and Effort Trust, the developers of the subject lands.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to close the public meeting, please? Councillor Conley, Councillor Pearson, all in favor? That is carried. And may I have a motion on the staff report? I will add that the Councillor Ferguson is in favor of this. Yes, thank you. Councillor Green, you had a comment?
Thank you. I'm just wondering through you, Madam Chair, to our legal department. I've heard a planner's explanation of the difference between may and will. What implications does that have for us, if any, with regards to this deal or other deals? So I just want a legal definition of may or will.
Mike?
Must or will is typically a mandatory provision, whereas may is a discretionary.
So just to confirm that in this particular scenario, through you, Madam Chair, that should something come up where the city partners with or needs access to this lot, then using the may gives us that ability versus the will not. Is that correct?
Yes, to you, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. All right, may I have a motion on the staff report? Councillor Pearson, you have a comment?
I'll move the staff report as amended.
All right, as amended and seconded by Councillor Pasuta. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 6.3, which is the application for zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 542 and 546 Old Mud Street, and that is in Ward 6. And I need to go through this again. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the zoning bylaw amendment, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Ontario Municipal Board. And the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of that board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. Now, may I have a motion to receive written comments from Gary Labate, Councillor Pearson, Councillor Pasuta? All in favor? That is carried. All right, and 3 times. Are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? Are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? And last time, are there any members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item? All right, seeing none. May, on the staff report, Councillor Pearson.
Madam Chair, for the 3rd time, I'll move that we waive the presentation of the staff report.
All right, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Conley. All in favor? I think that's setting a record. All in favor? Carried. All right, and we have Ron Tomlin, the agent for the applicant, is in attendance. Does the committee have any questions? You have no questions? Okay, may I have a motion to close the public meeting? Councillor Pearson and Councillor Green, all in favor? That is carried. And on the staff report, may I have a motion? Councillor Farr, would you move that motion? Okay, that's fine. So on the staff report, Councillor Pearson and Councillor Aidan Johnson. Thank you, everybody. All right, good work. Okay, so we're moving on to public presentations. We have none. Moving on to discussion items, we have 8.1, which is the Coordinated Provincial Plan Review, and it's the City of Hamilton staff comments. We have a delegation from Joanne Hickey-Evans, who will make the staff presentation. Is Joanne here? She was here. Councillor Pearson?
Sorry, Madam Chair, you're being very efficient this morning. I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, because I think we're going to be a little bit more time on item 8.1. Item 8.2 is the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee report, and I have a motion to refer this back. I'm just not sure if anybody is here for this, but a concern was brought by Councillor Ferguson. So I'm just wondering if we can just move to have it referred so these residents aren't waiting.
All right, so I'll test the will of the committee to move up item 8.2. Seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor? Okay, so I need, now, you're right, we need a motion to receive the staff memo providing additional information with respect to item 4 of the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee report regarding recommendation to designate 77 Gage Avenue North, which is formerly the King George School. So if I can have that item, a motion to defer, and that was moved by
Just item 5 that I'm deferring, Madam Chair. That's the Ancaster of 1021 Garner Road.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
All right.
You had me worried.
All right. So, all right. So you're going to move it, and then you're going to second it?
I have Councillor Connolly seconding it.
Councillor Connolly will second it.
So that item 5 of the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee Report 15-005, respecting the inclusion of 1021 Garner Road East to the Register of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest, be deferred to allow for further consultation with the owner and to review the wording. Please and thank you. Yes, and it does say here a motion to defer item 5 respecting 1021 Garner Road. That's what I was reading off, so thank you for that. All in favor? Carried. Okay. All right. So we will go. All right, seconded. Moved by Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And Joanne Hickey-Evans, welcome. Now we will have the presentation on item 8.1.
Sorry, I just went out for 1 minute ago, asked 3 various interesting questions on the way back in.
Yes, well, we're very efficient here this morning, just moving right along. So go ahead, Joanne, whenever you're ready.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. So this presentation is dealing with the City of Hamilton comments on the Provincial Plan Coordinated Review. So you may recall back in March of this year, the province announced that they were doing a coordinated review of 4 provincial plans, Growth Plan, Greenbelt Plan, Niagara Escarpment Plan, and Oak Ridge's Moraine Conservation Plan. The only one that doesn't apply in this city is Oak Ridge's Moraine. So in terms of the Niagara Escarpment Plan is the oldest by far. It dates back to the 1970s. And the Growth Plan and the Greenbelt Plan, which are flip sides of each other, actually are much newer, dating back to 2005, 2006. And so the province, there's interrelationships with all these plans. They wanted to review them together. So the review's being undertaken in a multi-staged approach. And the first stage is the stage we're in now, where they're seeking public input into all the 4 plans, and they're using a variety of themes. So they're not considering it on individual plans, but themes of transportation, natural heritage, agriculture, etc. So they held a variety of meetings throughout the different municipalities in the province that are, well, it's actually really the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, and then up towards Grey County and Bruce for the Niagara Escarpment Plan. So our meeting was held on April 16th, but in advance of that meeting, the City of Hamilton hosted their own events. There were 4 of them. And at the request of the Mayor, the province actually attended our Ancaster one, and they were really happy to do so. They learned many things that they hadn't learned before. And it was nice for them just to participate. And they were representatives from both Municipal Affairs and Housing, as well as the Growth Secretariat. So our meetings took a little bit of a different way of looking at these plans. We looked at that on a plan-by-plan basis because a lot of the constituents look at the plans from that lens. So we had a 2-hour workshop where a series of questions were asked and participants could answer and be part of a number of different conversations. In addition, we had a post-it board which identified things that you liked about each of the plans and things that you would like to be reconsidered. So all that information was summarized into a report, and it's attached as Appendix D in the staff report. But very quickly, what were the most common themes that we heard? One of them across all the plans was understanding them from a number of different perspectives. And in addition to the plans, there's also a provincial policy statement. They all have their own sets of terms, definitions, and regulations. And one of the big asks is that these be harmonized, because they're slightly different amongst all the plans. The other part was dealing particularly with the growth plan, is the targets and the forecasts. People find it difficult to understand when they apply, how they apply, what part of the OPs are used for that, and they wanted some clarity around that. Second theme we had is more support for municipalities. And that ranged from attracting and retaining jobs to providing stable infrastructure and transportation funding and providing services in the rural area. And then more focused on the policies, and it was mostly directed at the Greenbelt Plan, was the need to review not only the policies but the boundaries. Also the need to be more flexible in the rural area when we support secondary uses for farmers, and to keep existing industrial and commercial land uses in the rural area. So those are the comments that we received through the public consultation sessions we have. But I want to go back to, as staff, what we think are important. The growth plan, the Greenbelt Plan, the Agri-Escarpment Plan are helpful to the City of Hamilton, and they do support our long-term objectives. There are many successes, and these successes I've listed on this, and these are the major ones, but there are many, many smaller ones. Residential intensification. The building industry and some neighbourhoods are certainly more accepting of the increased densities, in recognition that in some neighbourhoods with a declining population, the local services suffer, and that we need to reinstate the population to support those services, as well as to make more efficient and effective use of our existing infrastructure and transportation networks. Waterfront and downtown revitalization, we're seeing the development of the GO Transit, the new GO Transit station on James Street North, the city investment in infrastructure, and the many land use planning initiatives that are underway. The fantastic LRT funding announcement recently. And on a side that you may not hear about or think about as much is we've had less pressure on converting our lands from employment to other uses. The growth plan has very strong policies on protecting employment land for the long term, as well as protecting our agricultural lands and our natural heritage features, as well as the systems. But having said that, after the plans have been in the works for 30 years, the Agri-Escarpment Plan has undergone some review in the past. This is the first review of the Greenbelt Plan and the Growth Plan. Some changes, some tweaks are required. So first, and this is a challenge across all plans, and it deals with the issue of mapping, but in particularly focusing on the Agri-Escarpment Plan, the Greenbelt Natural Heritage System. They're using mapping at a very, very high level. We have much more detailed level data and at a much finer grain. And we've always said to them we're prepared to share our data with them. Overlapping plans. Again, this is a theme we heard in the public. It's a theme that I'm sure absolutely everybody understands, is the need for consistent and clear definitions, terms, and regulations between all plans. It'll just make it so much easier. In some cases, we notice that there are competing objectives between different plans. And one example that comes to mind is dealing with brownfields and intensification, and then trying to deal with the viewshed analysis required as part of the Agri-Escarpment Plan. So there needs to be some sorting out of those differences. And as you can imagine, 10 years has gone by and new issues have emerged, primarily focused on climate change, energy planning, and the recognition of the built environment and the relationship with public health. I'm going to go through each of the plans, and in the staff report you will see appendixes A through C. There are commentary on each of the plans. Agri-Escarpment Plan is in Appendix C. An Agri-Escarpment Plan took a little bit of a different approach. They have a number of issues, and they've been around a lot longer. They had a series of discussion papers recommending very specific policy wording changes to their plans. We've reviewed the ones that are applicable to the City of Hamilton and have provided comments on that. So that appendix is slightly different than the others. Overall, the changes are minor. There is nothing very earth-shattering about the changes that we've identified in there. What is important to more important in the Niagara Escarpment Plan are two designations, and there's been history to the sites that are listed on the screen. The first one is the Robert E. Wade Park or Morgan Firestone Arena in Ancaster. These lands are designated rural. At one point in time, they only served, the town of Ancaster was very small, and they served the rural area. Well, it's grown into a citywide park. And in it was about 2010, there was an expansion, and there were some issues surrounding expansions as it relates to the rural designation. So at that time, the NEC had suggested that through the review that site should probably be appropriately designated to urban rather than rural, given its context. And and in a very similar vein, and this one's about the same time, actually, it was in 2011, and Council had directed that we consider this, is on York Boulevard in York Road in Dundas. There's an Olympic Park and Hydro 1 building. And those lands were brought into the Niagara Escarpment Plan back in 2010, but they were brought in as rural. And at the time, we said to them, well, that's, it's really more appropriately urban. But the way the Niagara Escarpment Planning Development Act is that only changes to urban would be considered as part of the 5-year review, so this is the time to ask for that change. So in terms of the Greenbelt Plan, there are a number of varying issues. One of them is the setbacks for the vegetation protection zones. They prescribe vegetation protection zone setbacks as hard and fast, yet at the same time you can do environmental impact statements to determine what appropriate setbacks are. So the request is that there should be some flexibility to determine what the setbacks are. This next issue is of no surprise to anybody. It's the issue of the rural area, and through the rural zoning we've heard through many a time the issue of recognize the local economy, the local rural economy in the greater role of the City of Hamilton, and more specifically identifying that there's some historic non-agricultural uses that need to be recognized and permitted over the long term. And even within the framework of the rural area policies in the Greenbelt Plan are not nearly as strong as that which you find in the prime agricultural area. So we're requesting that these policies be broadened and have a greater emphasis on rural areas. The third point is dealing with the size of agricultural parcels for severances. The Greenbelt Plan requires 100 acres or 40 hectares. The City of Hamilton doesn't have a lot of those sizes. But in a near urban area, there are many cases where smaller lots are actually they can yield quite a crop. So we're looking at some consideration for near urban areas for agricultural parcels and the size that they could be. Fourth one is value-added uses to agriculture. Through our zoning bylaw, we have built that in. In 2014, the provincial policy statement was changed to expand the definition of secondary and agriculturally related uses, and we've used that as our lens for the rural zoning, but we're asking that the Greenbelt Plan reflect the most recent amendments to the provincial policy statement. And finally, in terms of the Greenbelt Plan, the issue of the boundaries. There are some lands that may be in, may be out. We're hired a consultant to look at potential boundary changes, but we're recommending that in the fall we hold targeted stakeholder meetings as well as going out to the public and discussing that issue with them in advance of bringing it back to council and ultimately sending it off to the province. So in terms of the growth plan, there are some key areas that are quite important. Targets. I mean, you've probably heard 50 persons and jobs per hectare, and that has applied both across employment areas and non-employment areas. And for employment areas, 50 persons and jobs per hectare is very difficult because employment really doesn't have any persons, it has jobs. So we're looking at separating those and having a more realistic target for employment and retaining the 50 persons and jobs per hectare for the non-employment. So that would be all the residential, the commercial, the population-related employment. And that's a common ask by many of the municipalities. We'd like to protect our strategic employment lands for the long term. Again, in the provincial policy statement, they identified that municipalities had that right to protect it. They weren't as specific as we perhaps would like, but it would be very helpful to align it with long-term infrastructure planning. That's typically in the 50-year range compared to land use planning, which is 20. In terms of intensification, there are intensification policies in the growth plan, but they focus on intensification areas. We would like additional policy direction for areas that are stable residential or areas that are in the midst of reinvestment, or they're changing very slowly. So it would be helpful to have a greater degree of clarity for that purpose. And finally, in terms of transportation, we would like better policy direction for local transportation, the importance of local transportation, and identify all the regional corridors in the growth plan that have been identified in the big move. Implementation, a very critical part of meeting the growth plan, Greenbelt Plan, Niagara-Escarpment Plan objectives. The land use planning process improvements. That was started back a few years ago. The city submitted comments to that end, and resulting there's Bill 73. The city comments will be coming forward on Bill 73 in July, so I'm not going to spend any time on that, but simply just to identify that that is coming forward for you. New tools, always an important aspect when we're considering different issues, and one of them, and we've asked over and over and over, is conditional zoning, and that's basically zoning and you establish a series of conditions, and it's more flexible and can be used in a number of different scenarios. And the more recent tool you might have heard about, inclusionary zoning, to deal with the issue of affordable housing and making sure that there is some affordable housing in various developments. Another thing that keeps coming up is the long-term stable funding model. It's fantastic that the LRT has been supported, that $1 billion investment, but long-term sustainable investment must continue to be a priority for successful implementation of the growth plan. And finally, one of the areas that we also identified was better alignment between the mandates of their various ministries. And one of the examples that's most identified in this particular situation is dealing with the Ministry of Education and how they identify the number of surplus seats. And some, schools with low enrollment are often in the neighborhoods or we're undergoing life cycle changes, and so based on their funding model, they have to close the schools. But schools are very, very important to the revitalization, especially when we're focusing on intensification for the long run. So those are the comments on the various plans. There's a little bit more detail in each of the appendices, but I didn't want to go through all of them. So what are our next steps? The next steps are to take the comments and the staff report and all the attachments and have clerks forward them to the province as part of our formal submission. We did provide some comments to them in advance of the May 28 deadline, but these are supplementary. Staff will be meeting with the provincial staff to discuss the contents of the report with them. And finally, as I mentioned before, we're looking at doing some public consultation on potential Greenbelt boundary changes in the early fall. So that concludes my very quick summary of the Coordinated Provincial Plan Review.
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate the presentation. Now, so far I have Councillor Collins and myself on the list. Is there anyone else on the committee? Councillor Pasuta? I'll put you after Councillor Collins. Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Madam Chairman, and through you to Joanne. Joanne, in terms of what's on the outstanding list, then, is it just the consultation on the potential Greenbelt boundary changes that are left for discussion, or other elements of the list that you've provided to us still open for comment and interpretation?
Through you, Madam Chairman, you're right, it's the consultation on the Greenbelt boundaries. The other contents were just commentary on some of the changes that we suggest could be. I
recall the discussion about the OMB and
yes, that is
along those lines. So we've submitted.
That's a separate process to this. I just wanted to mention that in the context that is an important part. So as I said, Bill 73 will be coming forward in July.
I want to ask for whatever comes forward with then the Greenbelt Plan boundary changes, that we get as much information as possible, and that we have alternatives for consideration presented to us. And what I have found in the past with some of the higher level policy discussions that we've had, essentially we get one recommendation and we're left to either change it on the fly or adopt it that day or deny it and send it back. So I know that that one's going to be a sticky one for us in terms of all of the stakeholders, if you want to call them that, who will come forward and suggest that either there's no changes or that we tweak it or make wholesale changes with the boundaries, and it's always a contentious issue locally. But I would like to have as much information as possible when I make that decision. So I don't know what that involves in terms of even some of the past decisions that have come about over the years, including new information that we may have in hand, either that we've paid for internally or that someone's provided us. I just really want to make an informed decision because we've been, by and large, we've been the beneficiaries of much of the, provincial policy, growth policies have really benefited Hamilton, and you've listed a number of them in terms of the residential intensification that we're seeing, the cranes that we're seeing for the first time in a long time downtown. But I have to say that the top of the list for all of us, especially for those of us in the lower city, we're seeing more people from Toronto move here, purchase homes, fix them up, and they're making a big investment in this community. And that wave has hit Hamilton because of, in large part, many of the provincial policy plans that have been put in place in the GTA, which has constrained growth there and has made growth very expensive. And we've become certainly the more affordable option for many people who are either looking to downsize or looking to make their first investment. So a little bit of a commentary there, but I do want to ask just at a very high level, the more information the better when it comes to making the decision about plan position that we'll adopt eventually. Sorry, when are we going through that? I thought I saw July in the in your presentation through you, Madam Chairman.
Through you, Madam Chairman, absolutely. We will provide you as much information. We want this to be a robust discussion with all the information that we have, in which to make decisions, to allow the public and stakeholders to make their, provide comments to us. The early fall.
Early fall.
Yeah, September.
For the decision process.
For going up to the public consultation.
Oh, so year end by the time we have something in hand, most likely. Fourth quarter, or are you still?
Yeah, we will try to rush it as soon as we possibly can, recognizing the time elements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pasuta, please.
Madam Chair Partridge and Joanne, thank you for the presentation and all your work and staff's work dealing with all this. Yeah, the meetings that the city held, the 4 meetings, can you describe what the main concern was for the residents coming out to the meeting?
So, through you, Madam Chairman, in terms of the meetings, we held 2 in the rural area, 2 in the urban area. The rural area were attended the most. I'd have to go back through the plan, but I mean, the things that I heard anecdotally were some didn't know the Greenbelt Plan existed. There was much of the discussion that we heard about some of the economic pieces surrounding the non-agricultural uses. Also the value added, making sure that farmers have the opportunities to take their products and add their value, dealing with secondary on-farm type uses and the diversification thereof. Those were some of the comments that we heard. In the public consultation document, we tried to arrange it on the basis of each of the plans, because we also had Greenbelt Plan people at the urban and we also had some urban at the rural. So those are the ones that I heard anecdotally when I was walking around. Councillor Pasuta may have heard some additional ones, which she's absolutely free to share. We tried to capture as much as we could in taking notes and so on.
True, and Madam Chair, originally when the first Greenbelt came into place, where we have now, there was lots of comments of agriculture out there that, you know what, it's taking away from agriculture, it's taking away their land rights. It's somewhat turned around now. We're starting to realize, agriculture start realizing more that we have to preserve our farmland, but we also have to preserve our farmers, and we're losing farmers left, right, and center. And maybe even after this spring, as wet as it is and what's going on, we're going to lose some more yet. I'm hearing also the other side of the fence, you know, people and farmers are looking, why don't we expand it across Ontario farther and put us all in the same boat? And then we kind of, our development and housing and industry bring it closer within the tighter and save our farmland. There's nothing out there you can't reproduce land, and the rest of everything else can be made or built or whatever. One of the things in here, and we've been discussing this as we deal with the farmers in my ward, small farms are trying to acquire more land. Back in the 60s and the 70s, a lot of the farms were taken divided, for whatever reason. Sold off in parcels, and some homes with the barns have 10 acres, have 20 acres. Glad we're recognizing this, that we want to capture those lands back again, and the small farms out there want to add a bit more. So that's included in here. We're working on that, and that's an important step for us to work through. And we've discussed this so far, Madam Chair, but the settlement areas out there, are we, your staff, looking at expanding some of those settlement areas a little bit, or are we going to try to retain them as they are? You, Madam Chair?
Through you, Madam Chair, that would be up to the municipality to do. The one problem right now, and we've identified that in Appendix B, B's or A, is that there is a policy in the Greenbelt Plan that basically says that at the time of the original development of the official plan or 5-year review, but depending on the municipality, that was your only chance. So we're asking for a little bit more flexibility. So if the policy stays the way it is, there will be no changes to the rural settlement area boundaries. I think for the most part, overall, we might be tweaking. We've identified some parcels that may require to be in, and they transect different properties. But overall, we're not looking at growing them to any great degree.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm not looking at expanding major developments of housing in these small settlement areas, but there's parcels that are landlocked in there. They're just outside into the Greenbelt. And I'll give you an example of property in Linden where actually they got the sidewalk right up to his house down there. He's got a double width lot, which is potential to sell that lot. Of course, it creates some income for him. It also creates a housing lot, build a house, and then it generates some taxes, whatever the size of the house is. It's not being used for agriculture. It's just got a lawn on it, and it's really outside the agriculture portion of the farmland there. So ones like that could be captured. It'd be kind of good for everybody in the big picture. But I don't want to take away any more farmland or add any more urban, suburban development within those lands. But I'll leave the questions for other ones. Madam Chair, thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Councillor Pasuta. Councillor Green, did you? No? Okay. If I can turn the chair over to Councillor Pearson, please. I do have a couple of questions myself. And I appreciate that this is coming forward now, and that we had the opportunity when the province put that one meeting that they were going to have for our area, and I very much appreciate, and I want to thank staff for immediately jumping on that to have our own local meetings to be able to get input from our residents. And Joanne, you've alluded to it, that there is confusion out there. There are people who still don't know about the Greenbelt Plan. But I would say by and large they do. When I look at the public consultation, though, and your comments in your slide, certainly more support for municipalities to look to attract, retain jobs, infrastructure funding, providing services in the rural community. And I guess, where I'd like to get your comments if I could, because certainly what we're going through right now with the rural zoning changes, there's issues with certain companies not being able to, they can continue doing what they're doing, but in terms of expanding or getting into, some businesses that they're under the current zoning they could do, under the new rural zoning changes they won't be allowed to do. And so, to me, that is really at odds with looking at attracting and retaining jobs and looking at, maybe securing those services in the rural community. So, then this is the Greenbelt, but under our policies, we're looking for more local input into the policies and boundaries for the Greenbelt. And again, this was public comment coming back. We need to be more flexible to support the secondary uses of farmers and keep existing industrial and commercial land uses in the rural area. I mean, we've been hearing that loud and clear, and what I'm seeing is that when you had the public meetings for the Greenbelt, You heard that loud and clear there as well. So how can we address this or marry the two? I just find that if we're looking at these two issues, how can we make sure that we're marrying those two together, especially when it comes to the Greenbelt?
On recommendation 20. Recommendation 21 in the staff report specifically identifies that.
Okay. Can you expand on that just a little bit? Because I'm asking these questions on behalf of people who are either in attendance here or who may be watching live stream. We've seen the report. We know what we're talking about around this table. But for anybody watching today, I'd like them to hear some answers of, that we are addressing it. We did hear what the public said. And how are we doing that? Through you, Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, with respect to recommendation 21, very specifically what the recommendation says is the rural area policies be broadened to A, recognize the important role of the rural area in the local and regional economies, B, recognize that rural areas also may contain productive agricultural land, and B again, but should be C, expand the list of uses that may be considered for existing planned highway, commercial, and industrial areas that have not been fully implemented but will not revert to agricultural uses. And then dealing with the whole notion of the support for agriculture in itself, recommendation 20 says that the recent changes in the provincial policy statement respecting agriculture to recognize certain uses that add value to raw farm products be adopted into the Greenbelt Plan to provide consistency between planning documents. So in these two recommendations specifically, we identified the issue of the rural economy, the non-agricultural uses, and the agricultural uses as well.
All right, and so, and that's fine. Those are the comments for the Greenbelt and wanting to look at making those adjustments. But considering that our new rural zoning bylaw will be coming forward July the 7th, are we also, have we incorporated that looking through that same lens to what we're suggesting in our new rural changes? Because to me, they seem a little bit at odds. Looking for more flexibility from the Greenbelt, and yet we're not really building it into our new rural zoning bylaw, and I'm wondering why that is.
Well, to start from the agricultural piece, we have absolutely built in the flexibility. We have built in the flexibility using the provincial policy lens of 2014. So we absolutely have done that. Our definitions are absolutely more broad, and from an agricultural perspective, it actually implements what the provincial policy statement has, although the Greenbelt is I wouldn't say supersede, it's not as flexible.
Okay.
And the province has no issue with that whatsoever because they realize that, we're in a bit of a transition phase as a result related to the two documents. With respect to the rural agricultural, the rural industrial and commercial uses, we have to conform to the Greenbelt Plan as it is today. We've provided as much flexibility as we can in terms of definitions, recognizing existing uses as it relates to groups that are in the business parks. So instead of just having the use on their property, they can have the use on that is surrounding them. So we've provided flexibility in there. And we're going as far as we can at this point with respect to the Greenbelt Plan.
And I appreciate that because we've heard loud and clear from business owners and residents in Flamborough and Ancaster and Glanbrook and other rural areas on, the issues that they have with the rural zoning bylaw. Now with the Greenbelt though, if through you, Madam Chair, I'm sure I thought I heard you say that we're asking the Greenbelt, staff's comments are on behalf of our residents to build in more flexibility here, but I heard on the other hand that with our new rural zoning changes that they must follow the Greenbelt as it is now, and I appreciate that. But when they implement the Greenbelt changes and allow more of that flexibility, are we then going to look at our rural zoning bylaw to make sure it marries that?
Through you, Madam Chairman, yes, that's one of the recommendations that we will be looking at is that should, in the event with this specific issue, if they broaden it, we would go back and look at what was there.
Okay, and I think, thank you for that, because that is very, very important, I think, for our residents, for our farms, and for our businesses to hear that we will be revisiting the new rural zoning changes, even whatever happens on July the 7th, say it gets passed. There's certainly been a significant amount of tweaking and changes that staff have made, but it's important that people understand that that there is a will to revisit that the city will do that, and that's what I heard you say. Through you, Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, at some point in the future, if for this specific purpose, we, especially as it relates to the commercial and the non-industrial, I think the important thing to note about the Greenbelt Plan, though, or any other plan, at the time where changes come forward in the individual plans, municipalities must bring their official plans into conformity with the new documents. So that will be one of the first steps that's going to have to occur. I mean, we don't know the extent, but it's usually during the time of a 5-year review. And for the rural official plan, it's 2017, 2018, and the growth and the urban follows that in a year or so later.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, just to, I'm not sure if I heard you say or saw in the presentation, is there a deadline for the Greenbelt review? We know that's happening in 2015, but for the revisions and the implementation of a new Greenbelt, what are the deadlines or dates around that? Do we know that at this point?
Through you, Madam Chairman, we don't know specific dates, but what we do know is that in the phase 2 that they will be looking at the comments that they received, and then towards the end of the year, early next year, they're looking at different amendments. There's not specific clarity on exactly what the phase 2 and timing is based on reviewing what the website has, but suffice it to say they've got thousands and thousands of comments.
So part of the review happening in 2015, absolutely no guarantee, though, that what is all the comments they received, that they'll be able to do anything before 2017, 2018.
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is from the provincial end that they'll be quicker than that. It'll definitely be quicker than that. They are looking, they would have hoped later this year or early next year to get the amendments done.
Okay, thank you. And I have just one final area that I'd like to just get some explanation on and visit through you, Madam Chair. Under the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and I'm not sure which one this is, but it says change designations from the escarpment rural to urban, and you've listed the park in Ancaster and the Olympic Park in Dundas. And just to follow up on Councillor Pasuda's comments and questions around, the rural settlement area. I have a number of residents, as you know, where half of their property is in the rural settlement area and the other half of their property is zoned agriculture. So they can't split their land because instead of, the parcels being this way, the zoning is this way. So it really cuts off their land. And you and I have talked about this many times. What I'm trying to get my head around, though, is what is the process to change those boundaries? Because what I'm seeing here is that the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and I realize our rural settlement areas are not in the Niagara Escarpment Plan, but boundaries can be moved and changed from rural to urban, and yet the municipality, what is the process we need to go through to do that? Because I understood it was completely separate outside of this and outside of the rural zoning bylaw.
Through you, Madam Chairman, depending on where the responsibility lies. So, for example, Niagara Escarpment Plan, we're asking them to change their plan.
Okay.
So that has to follow this process at the time of a 5-year review. We knew especially about the Ancaster Park that should have been done quite some time ago, but when the Greenbelt Plan came in, when we did the new urban OP, we didn't have the chance. So this is our time for those 2 pieces of property. With respect to rural settlement areas, those are at the time of a rural official plan review. However, as I did indicate, there is a policy in the Greenbelt Plan that it's said that it can only be done once, and we did that in 2006. So we've identified that policy needs tweaking so that we have the ability in the future to revisit our rural settlement area plans. But they will be done as part of the rural official plan review. And there are a number of considerations when we look at changes to rural settlement area boundaries. And most particularly is removing, in some cases, depending on where the boundary is, prime agricultural land. So there needs to be a lot of work surrounding that component as soon as you move prime land. But that's where it would fall in terms of the RSA boundaries for the City of Hamilton.
All right, and just to confirm or clarify again, what is the timing on that?
Oh, the rural official plan review is not going to be even started until such time as the Greenbelt plan gets changed, because we need to conform to that, and unless we know what those changes are, it makes more sense to start after, so that wouldn't be till 2017.
Okay, so sometime 2017, we would be looking at to start the opportunity to perhaps move some of those boundaries where it just makes sense to capture whole properties into the rural settlement area.
Through you, Madam Chairman, there will be a series of, as most official plan reviews, we identify where our issues are, because it doesn't mean that we're going to start from scratch, absolutely not.
Okay.
And targeted, and then we would identify the necessary studies to make the changes as required.
Okay, and thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, the Niagara Escarpment plan on the two properties that I just referenced in here, did staff look at all of the properties in the Niagara Escarpment jurisdiction to determine if there were any other properties that made sense to move the boundaries on from rural to urban?
Through you, Madam Chairman, through the period of years when we look at development permits that comes through, there really isn't very much. These were very, very specific because they are long historic properties that, well, the first one in particular in Ancaster had always been in the rural, and it's one piece of a much bigger designation. And there were issues because it was developing more into a very sophisticated recreational center and park, no longer fit the model of rural. And then the second one was because they were moving from the Parkway Belt West plan into the Niagara Escarpment plan. If we had our druthers, it would have been urban right then and there. And that's what City Council had wanted. But we couldn't. So the interim step was rural until this time where we could do it urban. But it wasn't, we didn't go around and look at wholesale changes. This is some of the only areas where you have it really linked closely to have rural adjacent to the urban boundary. Much of the other rural is up in Ward 15, as you know, along the boundary. And then we have minor urban settlements. Those are not changing. Those are basically portions of Copetown, Greensville, and out in Winona on the south side. And
right.
So there really weren't too many opportunities. These just happened to be recreational facilities that were not really in the appropriate designation.
Okay, thank you for that. And so and thank you for raising the properties that are in Ward 15, which are in Waterdown, and they are rural, they are agriculture, and they do butt right up against the urban boundary. So the opportunity to look at changing those boundaries, again, would that be 2017?
Through you, Madam Chairman, if they are in rural, or if they're in the Greenbelt plan, if they're in rural, in particular as it relates to Niagara Escarpment plan, there would be no opportunity for urban boundary expansion in there.
Okay, so thank you. I just need a clarification on that. And my last question through you, Madam Chair. Niagara Escarpment Commission and the Greenbelt, which one trumps the other?
Through you, Madam Chairman, actually the way it works is they are in the Niagara Escarpment plan is part of the Greenbelt plan, but they have individual policies, so they do not overlap with respect to the policy regime or the designations. So they don't trump, they work together.
You're sure about that?
That I'm absolutely,
That's not my
sure.
Experience.
No, but I think some of the problem is the way the Greenbelt plan is written. It says that incorporates, if you read the Greenbelt plan, it incorporates the Niagara Escarpment plan.
Right.
It incorporates the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, another standalone plan. And then the Greenbelt plan itself is protected countryside. So the protected countryside applies to all the rest of the Greenbelt plans except where we have the Niagara Escarpment plan and the Oak Ridges Moraine plan. And it's just the way it's, and actually the Parkway Belt West plan, because if everybody knows about Pleasant View, we have the 100 layers in there that we would like to get out from under. But that's the way it's written, and it's hard to follow that, but that's actually how it's operative. So in the very beginning, you will see that it says in the Niagara Escarpment plan, it still stands alone.
All right, and I thank you very much for your answers, Joanne, but I will tell you, when I've talked to residents who have had to deal with the Niagara Escarpment and with the Greenbelt issues, they clearly were told that the Niagara Escarpment trumps the others, and so there's been some interesting dialogues there. Anyway, I'll take the chair back. I have...
Councillor Collins.
And Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And I was just asking Steve whether the 50 Greenhill Avenue site, the former St. Christopher's School, it's at the base of the escarpment, falls under the NEC plan, and I believe it too has a rural designation, even though it's clearly within the urban area. So can I just ask Steve whether or not that needs to be added to the list with the Robert Wade Park and the other one that was referenced through you?
Through you, Madam Chairman, to the Ward Council, yes, I would recommend that if you wanted to remove those lands and or remove them from development control, that it be incorporated into the list going forward to the province.
If I could move that amendment, friendly one, to the list here, to give staff direction, I guess would be the motion to include
Absolutely.
50 Greenhill, which is coincidentally a notice of motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do you want to deal with that now? Or when you, yeah, why don't you get a seconder? And moved by Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Aidan Johnson. All in favor? That is carried. Okay, thank you. But that's one of my concerns is, you know, how are we identifying properties within the Niagara Escarpment Commission that could be brought into? Is it because as councillors around this table we happen to know about them? I don't think that's good enough. So I have a real concern about that, and you know I should probably hand the chair back over to you, Councillor Pearson, because I do have a concern about that, and I'd like to hear staff's input, please, Jason.
Yes, through you. So I did see you turn the chair over. So, Matter or Mr. Chair. I think that was one of the reasons why we talked about in terms of the actual boundary discussions, why we wanted to have that opportunity to spend some time going back out to the public specifically on that issue. Certainly at the public meetings that we hosted, as well as the ones the province hosted, we had some individual landowners come forward with properties that they suggested to be either in or out of one of the provincial plans. So we have a record of those. We have a record of some that were discussed back at the time of when the Greenbelt was originally being drafted. There are some properties that Marseille may have been left out in error, or may have been left out through some sort of technicality. So we have a list of some of those. But I agree with you. We want to make sure that we're creating an opportunity for members of the public to come forward with other properties, either that they think should come in or should go out. And that's what the idea is behind having some additional time now to do some consultation before coming back to council with actual recommended options for boundary changes.
Okay, thank you. So then if I understand you correctly, through you, Madam Chair, these public consultation meetings, is that what's happening this fall? Is that what I'm hearing?
Through you, Madam Chair, yeah, that is the intent, that we'd have a specific conversation around boundaries, so we can take direction now in terms of properties to put forward to the province, but this would not be the only kick at the can, that we will have that opportunity to have some consultations in the early fall and provide some more comprehensive comments on boundaries to the province at that time.
Thank you. That certainly gives me a little more comfort because, I want to ensure that we do have meetings out in Flamborough and that they are well publicized a little bit differently than what we went through with the rural zoning changes. We're still having people phoning and saying, I did not know this was going to affect my property. So if we can work closely on that with the rural councillors just to ensure that we get that word out and that we hold those public meetings. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. And I'll take the chair back. I have no further speakers. We've had a motion to receive the presentation. Councillor Pasuda, Councillor Collins, all in favor? That is carried. All right, now I'll invite Sarah Noyle, Senior Planner with GSP, for her delegation respecting item 8.1. Sarah? Thank you, Joanne. And while we're waiting for the transition of PowerPoint presentations, Sarah will be representing her client, who is the owner of land at the northwest corner of Barton Street and 50 Road in Hamilton, and she's wishing to speak to 8.1. Sarah, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Committee for
right into the microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Committee for allowing me to speak on behalf of the owners, Mr. Sergio Mancia and Mr. Anthony DiCenzo, regarding their lands and the property within the Greenbelt. They are willing to provide additional comments to the committee if necessary. I appreciate Joanne's presentation and would like to expand on her slide relating to the Greenbelt boundaries. The site, as noted in the slide above, is approximately 4 hectares located in Stony Creek and is located between the urban boundary and 2 arterial roads, 50 Road to the east and Barton Street to the south. Approved subdivisions directly abut the site to the north and to the west, including the new St. Gabriel's Catholic Elementary School site. Our correspondence relates to the 2005 Greenbelt Plan and the municipality's contribution to the coordinated review process. As you are aware, City Planning staff prepared a report heard at the March 31st Planning Committee meeting relating to the proposed official plan amendment and draft rural zoning bylaw. The report itemized 6 areas not to be included in the new rural zoning bylaw. Specifically, this site was referenced in section 7.4, titled Lower Stony Creek, west of 50 Road. An excerpt from this section stated that as part of the upcoming provincial Greenbelt review in 2015, city staff will be recommending that the lands located between the existing urban boundary and 50 Road and north of Highway 8 should be removed from the Greenbelt plan and included within the urban boundary. Following this anticipated correspondence from the recommendation indicated by city staff, GSP submitted an independent letter to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, dated May 27th, and it's included in your package. This letter provided justification to the ministry to remove the site from the governance of the Greenbelt Plan, modifying the plan limits to utilize the 50 Road and Barton Street intersections as the limits of the Greenbelt area. Our justification included, but was not limited to, the size of the site, fragmentation due to arterial roads and the approved residential and institutional developments surrounding the site, and infrastructure that is available and or designated to accommodate the site. The adjacent subdivisions and infrastructure improvements on Barton Street to incorporate these Greenbelt lands were designed and approved through the city. The intersection that this property fronts onto has been referenced as a potential rapid transit route. 50 Road also provides direct access to the QEW, and directly north of the site, lands will provide major commercial uses. This property is a fragment of a parcel that was frozen due to what seems as an arbitrary Greenbelt delineation. We acknowledge that Section 1.2 of today's staff report indicates that Dillon Consulting has been retained to undertake a preliminary review of the long-term land needs in the city to accommodate future growth. Knowing that our position is consistent with planning staff's review, we respectfully request direction from Planning Committee on the mechanisms that the City of Hamilton will use to address specific properties through the Greenbelt Review and ask for inclusion in this process. We also invite the endorsement of these lands to be removed from the Greenbelt Plan boundary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have Councillor Farr with questions, please, for the presenter.
Mine are for staff, but I think the presenter and will receive the presenter at the appropriate time.
All right, thank you. I have no other questions. Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, Councillor Farr, questions of staff, please, on this item.
Pretty straightforward to me through you to Director Robichaud on the 2 requests at the end of this presentation, inclusion in the process and removal from the Greenbelt. Do you see any issues with this if we were to direct as a committee?
Through you, Madam Chairman, Staff have identified the merits in bringing these lands outside of the Greenbelt and bringing them into the urban area for the purposes of creating complete, healthy communities. So from that perspective, no, other than the process that we wanted to go through to consult with landowners for removing lands from the Greenbelt and or for making recommendations on adding lands to the Greenbelt. But from a planning perspective, in terms of a community building perspective, it would be a logical inclusion to the urban area for these lands.
Okay, Councillor. What I'm hearing, though, is that you have no problem with it from a planning perspective, but from a process perspective, you would prefer that it go through the normal process? Is that what I'm hearing?
Through you, Madam Chairman, no, I think what we're saying is the landowners, they've already made their delegation is that these lands should be removed. As they did indicate, and the staff indicated in the March 31st zoning report, that we identified all of the lands west of 50 Road were not going to be brought into the rural zoning because the long-term intent that these lands could be taken out of the Greenbelt. It's just more philosophically, we want to launch a comprehensive consultation program. But if it's the will of committee to make a recommendation in the province that these lands come out of the Greenbelt, I don't think there would be any issues or concerns from a planning perspective to do it at this point in time.
Well, for these, I would have no issue. And on the inclusion in the process, that being for the fall, it was one of the recommendations. I would direct staff to include GSP in this process, but I have no issue. I remember this great debate as part of our Fruitland-Winona expansion. Well, but even prior to that, I think this development's been kind of in the works for some years. So I have no issue today directing staff to it from the Greenbelt, as was the second request following the presentation through you, Chair.
So are you prepared to move that?
I would be happy to move that if I have a seconder. Councillor Connolly or Pearson.
Okay, Councillor Connolly, okay. I do have a question on it myself, if I can pass the chair over. Steve, I'm hearing, though, that there's the public consultation part of it that still needs to be done. Where does that fit into removing lands that are in such close proximity to all other developments? And can you just expand on that?
Through you, Madam Chairman. From a landowner's perspective, I think there would be less issues if council made the decision to remove lands from the Greenbelt. I think it's more from a landowner's perspective if lands were to be added. That was the one major issue the last time when the province released, they had the draft Greenbelt plan and then they released the final version of the Greenbelt plan. And in the final version, lands were added that weren't shown in the draft plan. And for some of those landowners, they expressed frustration and concern with the way that process played out. Whereas if lands are being removed from the Greenbelt, they would still be subject to our official plan policies, the PPS, and the rest of the planning regime for any consideration on urbanizing them. But it wouldn't necessarily make any changes from that perspective. It was more, I'm just thinking, where if staff or council was to make a recommendation to the province to add lands to the Greenbelt, we want to make sure we have a comprehensive consultation process for those landowners. Or if we were to change the designation of lands within the Greenbelt from, say, agriculture to specialty crop, again, for those landowners, it has implications, and we would want to have consultation with those landowners in those circumstances.
Okay, thank you. That makes perfect sense. I'll take the chair back. And go ahead, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you. And I want to ask a question on that line as well, Madam Chair. So through you to Steve, then, there are other small pockets in Stony Creek and Winona that are still in the Greenbelt. So those are all going to be looked at comprehensively. I think there's, if I'm not mistaken, there's one more at Glover. Is that correct? On the east side.
Through you, Madam Chairman, there's two essential pieces. There's the one closer to 50 Road, and then there's the piece sort of in the middle. Originally, Council recommended that all of those lands be brought into the urban area when they adopted the Stony Creek Urban Boundary Expansion official plan amendments, which were subsequently caught up when the Greenbelt came into effect initially in 2006, and then a settlement was reached as to which lands would stay within the urban area and which lands would retain in the Greenbelt. As part of that, we would be looking at all of the lands in Lower Stony Creek that were originally part of that Scooby OPA as part of any consultation for possible areas for urbanization, given that it's contiguous to established neighborhoods, employment areas, and services are available for those lands. The big piece are often referred to as the quote-unquote E.D. Smith lands, and that was one piece that those owners have came forward and made several delegations to staff about, at the time of the Greenbelt review, and we would be looking at that as part of any discussion as options for areas to be taken out of the Greenbelt.
Thank you. Appreciate that, and that was my concern, is that we make sure they're caught they're captured in that review. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Green, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, with regards to this opportunity here, there was a motion that I had put forward to this committee after a particular project went. It was on Section 19, the as of right for duplexing. I'm just wondering how council directions are, letters to the Honourable Minister McMeekin. How are those directions from council included in this consultation process? Would that be me being on the record for some of those items? Would that be included in staff reports or recommendations in terms of directions or items that came from this committee?
So, Jason, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair. So depending on the nature of the direction, so if council were to direct particular properties that they want us to look at through this review, through the consultations that we're going to be going through in the fall, then we would certainly make sure those are put in front of the public as options, either for lands to be brought into the Greenbelt or taken out of the Greenbelt. So if that's the direction, then it would become part of that consultation process. If direction is given to actually include it in the recommendations going to the province now, following council ratification, along with the 20-odd recommendations you have before you that staff have put forward, if there are additional specific properties that council wants recommended in or out now, then those would become part of that those city comments to the province when those are sent out immediately following the council meeting. With respect to some of the implementation issues, which relate to amendments to the Planning Act, when we bring to committee on July 6th staff's comments on Bill 73 Planning Act comments, then the same would apply. So if there are additional comments that council wants to add to those that staff have already brought forward, then we can be directed to do that at that time, and we can include those in our recommendations to the province.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Madam Chair, I'll reserve my comments until that time, as it applies more to that than to.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pasuta, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair Partridge, and I'll be quick. Greenbelt designation for these lands, it says they're tender fruit and grape lands in Schedule 2, and yet were the request for consideration of the Canada Land Inventory from OMAFRA, the majority of the site is Class 4 soils, which is poor class soils, as anybody understands the soils, and referred to as non-prime agricultural lands. Through you, Madam Chair, do we know what crop is being grown, if any, on this land at the present time?
Who on staff? Okay, go ahead, Joanne, please.
Through you, Madam Chairman, just to confirm, we're talking about the lands that were subject to the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, perhaps the best idea would be to ask the planner, but I don't believe anything is specifically grown on it. With respect to the other property that Steve talked about, the E.D. Smith lands, there used to be cherries on there. Not there now.
Okay, so yeah, and I know the E.D. Smith. So, Madam Chair, could we ask the applicant and how long it's been, if it's in crop or how long it's been out of crop, please, through you?
Comment from there? There's no crops growing on it, nor has there been for a while. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pasuta. All right, I have no further comments or questions from any. May I have a Roche? Well, we've already received the delegations. So next we will have Linda Lukasik come down, please, representing Environment Hamilton. Pardon? Sorry, Linda, just one moment, please. Madam Clerk.
Madam Chair, we had Councillor Farr's motion.
Okay, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Appreciate that. Linda, welcome as always.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. You may know Environment Hamilton has been very actively involved in the coordinated plan review. We've done a lot of work to make Hamiltonians aware of the review process. We've shared our perspectives with the community regarding what we see as challenges and opportunities that we believe are worth considering within the context of the review. And we've encouraged Hamiltonians to take the time to prepare and submit their comments on the review process through the Environmental Bill of Rights. And I'm pleased to share with you that through our efforts, we know that we had over 75 people prepare written comments and get them submitted to the province. So we're really pleased that we were able to achieve that. We submitted comments as well as an organization, and those are posted to our website. I'm happy to share them with anyone here if you'd like to see them. We're also a very active member of the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance. I serve on the steering committee of that group, and that's a coalition of over 100 Ontario organizations who believe that a strong economy and protected greenbelt go hand in hand. I just wanted to preface my feedback today on the staff report with just expressing a little bit of concern about the process involved at the municipal level where the coordinated plan review is concerned. Well, we understand the timelines were tight on this process and it wasn't easy for staff. We found it challenging at the community level as well to get through the process. We're disappointed, I have to say, that the City of Hamilton was unable to get to the stage we are at now prior to the May 28th comment deadline. So for us as a commenting organization and for community members, it would have been hugely beneficial to see what staff perspectives were prior to preparing our comments, but also to see the reaction from Planning Committee and from Council. So I just want to share that as being a bit of a frustration. But having said that, I also want to say kudos to planning staff for consulting with the public. I think that's a very important thing that happened. But again, would have loved to have seen comments prior to the commenting deadline. And we know in other municipalities that information was out there. So a lot of the organizations in our OGA network were reviewing and being able to respond to municipal perspectives in what they prepared for the province. So it feels like we were at a little bit of a disadvantage from that point of view. I'm going to really focus today by saying we have a very keen interest as Environment in Hamilton. You won't be surprised to hear me say this, to see the greenbelt grow in the Hamilton area, and to see that balance with more efficient use of land within the urban boundary. I know Joanne Hickey-Evans has made that reference to the two plans, the growth plan and the greenbelt plan, and the yin and yang and a balance too. We think that's very important. So we were really pleased to see in staff comments acknowledgement of the climate crisis and the impacts that we know we can't avoid moving into the future. They're inevitable. We couldn't agree more. So we think part of what really needs to be considered in all of this is food security. So I take that back to growing the greenbelt. And Councillor Bassoud, I appreciate your earlier comments about farmland, and once it's gone, it's gone. So I'm happy to hear that there still is going to be opportunity for the public to be consulted on what the city's position may be going forward on adding parcels to the greenbelt or taking parcels out. And maybe in response to the previous presentation, I would urge you to consider all of those pieces within one comprehensive process as opposed to making any decisions today. I think from a public point of view, we're going to look at the process with a lot more integrity if we know you take that holistic approach and consider all at once. What we would urge you to do is to think about some of the opportunities that you have as a municipality. You have the power now to grow the greenbelt within Hamilton. So there's an urban river valley designation that you could take advantage of. We've been talking to some of you about that, and that would allow you to create what we describe as fingers of green flowing from the greenbelt into urban Hamilton. And some may argue that that's merely symbolic, but we would say it's a really powerful way to help urban Hamiltonians to see the importance of and respect our rural land around us. We also want to raise the issue of the White Belt, and for those who haven't heard that term, that's that sizable swath of land we have in Hamilton that's sandwiched between the urban boundary and where the Greenbelt starts. And we would really like to see an open dialogue, and it would be fantastic if that could be part of the proposed consultation that happens in the fall, to engage Hamiltonians in an open conversation about what we see as our vision for the future of those lands. I think there have been some assumptions that that's urban land in waiting, but we would argue within the context of some of the challenges that we're facing, that's something that we need to talk about. Maybe it's wiser for us going into the future to really think about the importance of preserving and protecting more agricultural land as food security becomes a bigger issue moving forward. So I would just like to put that out there for you to think about. Just very briefly, some more specific comments on staff recommendations. We really do support the proposal from staff to reduce the size of what constitutes a viable farm, but we would caution, I think one of our concerns with this is that if you are in a position to be able to parcel out smaller pieces of land, how do we ensure, and I think this is a challenge that exists with all of the agricultural land within the Greenbelt, how do we ensure that it's actually farmed? And I know in our comments to the province, we raised this concern and put some ideas out there about creative ways to ensure that farmland is farmed and that farmers are properly supported. So we pointed to other jurisdictions like New Jersey where some pretty creative things are happening to support farmers who've been caught in this transition from non-Greenbelt to Greenbelt. And then there are also really interesting concepts around farmland trusts. So states like Maine have done a lot of work on that front through their not-for-profit farmland trust in an effort to protect farmland and to keep it in the hands of farmers. So we would put that out there as an important concern we need to keep in mind. But that whole notion of near urban farms and farm markets is a fantastic idea, and I can't help but think of, some of the properties you were just talking about in Lower Stony Creek, those E.D. Smith lands that not that long ago had cherry trees on them, that it was heartbreaking for me to see torn out after they were, not too many years after they were planted. And looking at those kinds of opportunities, those to me are ideal parcels for growing if we're looking at feeding an urban population. Makes a whole lot of sense, particularly given the microclimate in that area. We do have concerns about the references to rounding out rural settlement areas, and I think in hearing some of the more detailed conversation today, it sounds like it's not with the intention of extensive growth in those areas, so that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable hearing that. Just want to talk about consistency between plans, and we certainly support that as well. We share concerns that planning staff have expressed around definitions and confusion from one plan to another. But what we would say too is that in making sure that consistency exists, I think the call needs to be for the most protective policies to prevail so that all of those plans are brought up to that higher, more stringent level of protection within the Niagara Escarpment Plan, Oak Ridges Moraine, and the protected countryside. Sorry, I'm just scanning through here to see what else I need to really raise with you. Maybe just a few comments on the growth plan too. In our conversations, we felt that there was value in the city aiming for higher densities where possible and viable within the urban boundary. And I think, can appreciate some of the challenges staff are facing with proposals for intensification outside of growth centers. Pleased to see that there's more dialogue happening at the municipal level around things like a tall building policy. And there's some really healthy community dialogue happening. I know we're co-sponsoring an event tonight along with, I think, 11 or 12 other neighborhood associations where we'll be talking about this very issue. So I think you're going to be getting a lot of really good input and direction from communities that are very interested in this and are being impacted in various ways. So again, I just, in conclusion, want to say I'm happy to provide any of you with our detailed submission if you want to take a look. But again, I would really emphasize the need on any plan to modify the boundaries of the Greenbelt, that you should really be doing it in a comprehensive review that includes any parcels that might be included or taken out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate your comments. And do you have your submission? Do you have it electronically, or do you have a hard copy? I can email it to you. If you could provide it to Madam Clerk, yeah, I think everyone would be appreciative of receiving it. Do I have any questions for Linda? Any comments? No? All right. Motion to receive. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Aidan Johnson. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay. I'll just have to bear with me. Figure out. We received the delegation, and are there any more questions or discussion regarding 8.1? And I'm seeing none. May I have a motion to approve item 8.1, please? Councillor Matthew Green and Councillor Rob Pasuta. All in favor? That is carried. As amended. Thank you. Yeah, that is carried. Okay, and we've dealt with item 8.2, both sections of it. And so moving on to motions, for the record, we need to note that Councillor Farr's motion regarding White Star property, which was a notice at the last Planning Committee meeting, is not included on this agenda as it is on tomorrow's General Issues Committee agenda, since that is where it more appropriately falls within that committee's mandate. Okay? And notices of motion, Councillor Collins, you have a notice of motion?
I'm going to leave it as a notice.
Okay.
Or actually, I'm just asking for a report, so if you would allow me then to bump it up.
Absolutely.
Waive the rules.
Move to waive. Councillor Farr and Councillor Matthew Green, all in favor? Carried.
And I'll read it out if you would allow me, Madam Chairman. It's that staff in the real estate section of the Planning and Economic Development Department be authorized to investigate and report back to Council on the potential acquisition of the 1.48 acre parcel of land at 50 Greenhill Avenue and available funding options, including parkland credits. And essentially, this is the property that I referenced before. It was purchased privately by a developer. And I've been working with planning staff to facilitate a private development application at this location. And essentially, the applicant is stuck with the NEC rules that apply here. They're to wait until the NEC has been updated its plan, which will take years. It's caught in this kind of no man's land of the rural area, even though it's in the heart of the urban area. Sorry, it's designated rural, and we've just changed that today, so that's good. But the developer also has a development up on the escarpment, and I believe it's in Ward 8, and he owes the city parkland dedication funds. And so staff has suggested, and I thought it was a good idea, that we investigate the developer granting the city the ownership of this property in exchange for the parkland dedication monies that he owes. And so this is essentially asking staff to come back with the information as to whether or not there is a deal where we would consider such a swap, if you want to call it that. So we're asking for information. I'm not asking for that to happen today, but it's asking for the report, and it's based on the good suggestions of our staff who've been very helpful throughout this whole process, and it's been a frustrating one, I can tell you that.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. And your seconder for that was Councillor Farr. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. There are no other notices of motion. So moving on to general information and other business. Jason, did you want to give us an update on some things that are happening? You usually give us an update at the end of the Planning Committee, and we're getting there.
I do, Madam Chair. I don't have anything to report at this meeting.
Don't.
Am I missing something?
Okay. Well, I was just thinking you might want to note Mr. Edward Johns.
I could certainly do that, Madam Chair. I didn't know he was back there. So I did send out a notice, was that yesterday or 2 days ago, regarding a change in role for Ed John, who's been leading the urban team since the urban team was established in the development planning group. He's going to be taking on a new role, not until the fall, so he's still going to be leading the urban team for a couple of more months as we look for a replacement for Ed. He's going to be joining the waterfront team, working on some of the planning issues around the waterfront, in particular some of the housing issues around the waterfront. One of the major goals that Council has given us as we do our waterfront planning is to make sure that we are incorporating affordable housing into the development happening in the waterfront, and so that will be a big piece of the work that Ed will be starting to tackle starting this fall.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and congratulations to Edward. Councillor Farr.
Just a few questions on general information that may lead to a notice, not a motion, but a notice of motion. The first, just on tonight, there's a downtown, Madam Chair, Neighborhood Association gathering on intensification in the core, and through you to Jason. Jason, do we have staff attending, and if so, whom, if you know?
Madam Chair, we do, and it's me. So I'm going to be presenting on a panel with, I believe the other panelists are Steve Kulikowski, Dana Anderson, who's a planning consultant, former chief planner in Oakville, and Jim Dunn from McMaster University. The four of us have been asked to sit on a panel as you said, it's a joint session amongst a number of the neighborhood associations on the topic of intensification. What does intensification mean for the city? What does good intensification look like? And those types of questions. So there'll be a Q&A with that panel, and a couple other staff from the city will be there as well, to talk to, after the panel session, to meet with individual attendees to talk about the status of some of the various policy initiatives and planning files in the area.
Councillor?
Great, and obviously with you there, we'll be able to reiterate, for those who may not know, these are well-schooled individuals representing all 6 neighborhood associations at LUNA tonight, and I look forward to being in attendance too, but obviously we've done a lot of consultation lately, official City of Hamilton consultation with PIC after PIC, tall buildings, setting sail areas, West Harbour, both that and Barton Tiffany, and Pierce 7 and 8. So we'll be able to share that information and offer some dates on upcoming consultation as it relates to intensification in and around those plans that are adopted by council, and quite obviously moving forward with goals, some of them shovel-ready in the next few years. I have a question, Chair. This is very general. I apologize if it's too general, but I have now 3 proponents of some project, large and small, in one neighborhood, the Durand neighborhood, who have come forward and in the last, I'd say, couple of months, and they are really, really scratching their heads at how our parkland dedication fees have changed. They have gone, and it may be a situation across the city, and I may have missed a report or even signed off but forgot about a change to parkland dedication, but it's literally up thousands of percentages from what all 3 were aware of when they committed to entering into these projects. One is a larger project, one sort of a medium size where they're restoring a heritage building that caught fire, and another is just a guy putting an addition on the back of his home. So I'm wondering through you, Chair, if I may ask staff, what am I missing? Maybe who can tell us today just how much of a percentage increase and how that occurred and when it occurred? I could get some information on that so I can share it with these folks.
All right, thank you. On the Parkland Dedication Fund, actually, Jason, before, Joanne, could you just turn your microphone off, please? Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Jason.
So through Madam Chair, I can't provide a specific answer right now, but I think at staff we've been hearing some of the same issues in terms of how the calculations are being done the same. With the property values going up is resulting in some increase in terms of what those parkland dedications are. So I know I've asked to sit down with some of the staff and see how those calculations are being done, because I've seen some of the numbers as well that have been tied to some recent applications. Again, for the July 6th or 7th Planning Committee meeting, part of the Bill 73 comments we do speak to, there are some provincial proposals related to how parkland dedications are calculated. One of the issues that we have on our work plan is to look specifically at Steve and the planning group are doing this, looking specifically at how we are calculating and requiring parkland dedication for some of the smaller infill projects, because we have said some issues where issues of adding a basement apartment or converting from a lodging house to a rental house have triggered fairly significant parkland dedication issues. So we're going to be taking a look at how it applies to some of the smaller scale infill as part of our work plan, and bring forward some options for council's consideration.
Councillor?
That's a great question.
Councillor Collins?
The question, and it's a good one, and I was certainly thinking it, but I guess I'll ask now, or before I lose it through you, Chair, what happens to those who are currently in the queue if we're waiting for a report July 7th and then possible communication with the province, and you've got a guy wanting to build an addition on an old home on Bay Street. You have a neighborhood anxious to get their sidewalk back on the south side of Bold, where the Pasadena fire occurred, and where, fortunately for us, the REIT that owns the building is restoring and not tearing down, because it was a massive fire. And then you have a third phase of a development. They're also asking questions as it relates to City Square. And in that case, I'm hearing they went from $800 a unit to $12,000 a unit. And if you're talking about calculations going up based on assessment, I don't see assessment growing from those variables. So I'm just wondering what happens to those who are currently trying to get moving given the timelines you're offering? What can we do maybe as a committee to address that? Understanding that there are increases, there are going to be increases, that values have risen. And I think these proponents, the three that I'm referencing anyway, there's likely more, also understand this. But when you're talking about a percentage increase that is really off the charts, all three have, the fellow that wants to do the addition is $25,000. This is a small, 3-unit rental facility. So through you, Chair, to staff on those two issues.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Jason?
Steve, I'm going to ask Steve to answer in terms of the discretion in terms of waiving or seeking release from the parkland dedication fees. But to your question, I do recognize that some of those increases were that I've seen were substantial, and that's why I said I wanted to have a look at how those calculations are being done, because I know that land value is part of the input to that. But you're right; it does seem to be out of whack a bit with what we've seen in terms of the land value increases.
Yeah, I'll get to you in just a second, Steve, but I didn't say waiving. I didn't quite hear what you said right at the top. I'm not looking to waive any parkland.
No.
Just better understand how these increases occurred.
Yes, thank you for clarifying, because I heard that as well. No, I did not hear any mention of waiving fees. It was for clarification. Steve?
Through you, Madam Chairman, at the time of the issuance of a building permit, the developer is required to pay the parkland dedication bylaw at that rate in effect at the time of the issuance of the building permit. So for an individual coming in today, they will have to pay at that rate, notwithstanding any changes that may be made down the road to the parkland dedication bylaw. There is a provision in the parkland dedication bylaw that allows council by resolution to establish a lower rate without having to amend the entire bylaw. So they could pass a resolution. You could pass a resolution for either a certain geographic area or a specific class of development to say that the parkland dedication provisions would not apply in those circumstances. The provision in the bylaw only allows you to reduce the rate, not to increase the rate. So if you wanted to exempt basement accessory apartments from the parkland dedication bylaw requirement for a payment, council could do that by way of a resolution. And it could be a temporary element while staff are doing the review as a parkland dedication as it relates to intensification projects and intensification proposals. So that is an option that is available to council. You can do it for a class of development, a geographic area, and or you could attach a time frame on it. So if you wanted to waive it for 24 months or 12 months while staff are doing the review or at a reduced rate, you could prepare, we could assist you in drafting a resolution and you could pass that as it relates to the parkland dedication bylaw.
Through you, Chair, so if we were to waive in an interim 2-year, 24-month, that doesn't mean waiving the fee. Can you be clear on that?
That is correct. Council could establish whatever that new minimum would be through you, Madam Chairman, at the discretion of council. So, for example, I know the one case that you've talked about, you could go back to the old rate. You could say that going forward for the next 12 or 24 months, you want to hold the rate in effect that would have been applicable at the time of, say, 2013 or 2014, and that you would sort of continue what was previously in place at that sort of previous rate, as opposed to completely eliminating any parkland dedication payments that would be required. Again, it would be at your discretion as to how you wanted to structure that, whether it's by class of development, the rate, or geographic area, or a combination of those three or multiple criteria.
Thank you. And may I suggest that that's something that perhaps you do with staff and then bring back as opposed to trying to move here? Because I think there's a lot more involved that everybody around here would need information-wise.
What a wonderful suggestion that is. I'm grateful to see that Councillor Pearson has some questions, so I got a little time to sort of process all that's been thrown at me with this, quite obviously, maybe my first good question of the term at Planning Committee. So I'll use this time.
You have many good questions, Councillor.
That Councillor Pearson is offering some insights and questions, I'm sure, and that'll give me a little bit of time to process. Thank you, Madam.
All right, thank you. Councillor Pearson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councillor Farr. Certainly very well conversant on the issue that you're raising. Actually, you met the applicants, one of the applicants met with staff yesterday with the mayor and myself, and certainly yesterday afternoon on some concerns as well. So staff are very well aware of that. My question, though, and certainly appreciate where you may be intending on going in this, but I guess my only question is, if we change, not that I'm not saying I don't want to, but if we change it, what happens to anybody that's paid in that interim?
Steve?
Sorry, through Madam Chairman.
So we've had a development that has come forward, they've paid what they were required to pay, and now we change it and reduce it. What happens to the ones that paid the full price before we make the change?
I think through Madam Chairman, staff could work with legal to see if we could be creative essentially to make it a retroactive date. So if you wanted to say that this took effect January 1st as opposed to July 1st, then we would have to look at what would be the cost, what would be the implications. But in terms of basically saying that it was a transitional policy to retroact back to a certain date, and in that case, staff would work to issue refund checks to those individuals who paid at a higher rate.
So I believe that, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Madam Chair, because that's where I think, Councillor Farr, we really need to get pinpoint specific information before we put some recommendation on the table, just to be sure how we will affect. I mean, we have to recognize that some have paid, and I certainly recognize the developer that you're speaking of, and very, very passionate and sincere, and say we need to resolve his issue. But we have to be careful what we do with any others that have been approved in the interim.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Pearson, and I would agree. I think we'd want to see an information report. We'd want to see some recommendations. But Councillor Farr, for the second time?
So I would totally agree with that, and it's not exclusive to any one, and it's obviously not exclusive to any one geographic area.
That's right.
I'm wondering if, we might have the world's shortest subcommittee of this committee. Maybe 2 or 3 of us can gather with Steve and others on staff and even come back to the next planning committee with some recommendations. I see Councillor Pearson nodding her head, Councillor Partridge, and myself. So maybe I could just move one motion here, waive the rules on it, obviously, that a subcommittee on parkland dedications be established, a subcommittee of planning and economic development committee be established, and report back on their recommendations and findings at our next planning committee meeting.
All right, thank you.
By
But
Councillor Pearson.
before we do that, Steve, is the next planning committee meeting going to give you enough time? Because that's July 7th. That's a very, very heavy.
Madam Chairman, alternatively, we'd be looking at August, but I think if we can see what we can do between now and the July Planning Committee, and then if we need additional time, then we can work towards the August meeting. I think in part of the thoughts, getting to Councillor Pearson's idea, like we did for the Committee of Adjustment for the relaxing the zoning in the downtown, we recommended that there be a rebate established for those individuals who apply and pay. We would just have to assess the number of projects based on what we determine would council is looking at exempting or reducing the rate, what sort of magnitude of rebates would be eligible for those properties. But we could start pulling that information together once we had a better understanding of the nature, the types of projects in the areas. That would probably be the first meeting, and then the second meeting we could report back with that information.
Hey, Councillor?
To the subcommittee and then ultimately the planning committee for July. We can keep working towards that, at least to inform the councillor's motion for the July planning committee. If not a formal report, it may simply be a memo or an email that's distributed in advance of the planning committee.
Councillor, sound good?
I would first seek to waive the rules on a notice, I would guess, Ida. So moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pearson to waive the rules.
Waive the rules. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor.
And then the motion is to establish a subcommittee of the Planning and Economic Development Committee comprised of myself, yourself, and Councillor Pearson, and that committee report back after initial meetings with staff at our next planning committee meeting.
Okay, Ida, you got all that? All right, I think that sounds reasonable. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. All right, thank you. So now going to the outstanding business list, may I have a motion to approve the changes to the outstanding business list outlined in items 11.1A and B. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Aidan Johnson, all in favor? That is carried. Now, folks, on private and confidential, there may be no need for us to go in camera. If there's any discussion respecting private and confidential items 12.1 to 12.3, we can avoid the closed session, but I will need a motion with the staff recommendations remain confidential until the council is approved. Now, I have heard from both councillors on these items, and they are okay with them. So I leave that up to the will of the committee. All right, Councillor Conley, Councillor Green, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, and then I guess the only thing left is a motion to adjourn. All right, Councillor Pasuta and Councillor Farr, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you, everyone. Excellent. Thank you.